Right, well, my name is Michael Penrod. I'm a software engineer at a company called Vivint. It does smart home security and automation. We use Salesforce and a little bit of Ember in there. It's kind of the UI space is pretty open at my company. It's kind of whoever wants to do it and use whatever they want. It's kind of the way it is. And so this presentation today is kind of talking about hosting Ember in Salesforce. So if you're not familiar with what Salesforce is, it's a cloud-based like CMS platform, just customer management, and so you're hosting everything on their servers. And so the point of this talk is to talk about how to do custom UIs in there, specifically using Ember, because they control all the rendering of all the pages. So you kind of lose that ability to use kind of modern day technologies and modern day build systems for that. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So Ember and Salesforce, it's because I want to use Ember CLI, but Salesforce won't let me. And we'll go over why that is. So, okay. In Salesforce, has two different UIs, two ways that you can do UIs. They have this new thing called Lightning Components, and this is their approach to compete with single page apps, essentially, and just kind of frameworks that componentize things. So it's got these two pros that you finally get to write some JavaScript to do your components, which has kind of not really been supported all that well until recently, and it is like a componentized framework, which is good. But then you get to the cons, and it's got a lot of them. And I think to do a component, it requires like 7 different files to do a component, and I don't even understand what they are or what they all do. There's like one like a designer file and a component file and a controller file, but it's just to do this one simple little component, and so it's a really verbose thing. And it bothers me the most because it exposes this underlying architecture to you that you have to understand, but that should be abstracted away from you. And my thought of this, and maybe this has been fixed, but the first attempt that I had at React, I remember the first time I wanted to loop over a list of something, I got this error that I needed to provide like a unique like index per iteration. And I thought that was really weird because I didn't have one, so I just auto-incremented a number, and I kind of felt like, I was like, why do I need to do that? Like, why doesn't the framework, if I don't supply that, why doesn't it do it for me? So it's the same approach of like, they should kind of do that for you. Doing UIs in Salesforce, no build system. So you're doing traditional, like writing some code. It doesn't compile. You can't do any of that kind of stuff with it. You just have to write it and save it to their server. So you lose all your modern day tools of like IntelliSense and file and being able to have all this linting, and all the files are these .cmp extensions which your editor has no clue what to do with. So you just errors everywhere. If you try to change it to like say that it's JavaScript syntax, it just kind of blows up. And so every file that you save to Salesforce you're syncing a file to their server. So you might have that file pulled down locally, but on every save it has to sync, and sometimes it takes like up to like 30 seconds, which is just unacceptable, and it's slow and it's painful. And part of the reason for that is Salesforce is a multi-tenant environment. So other companies share the server cluster that you're on. So if Joe Schmo in another company is running some crazy like batch script that's just like sucking the resources out of that box, your development is inhibited because of that. And it's got some other cons, like you can't make AJAX requests. You have to proxy all requests through their underlying server-side code, which is called Apex, which is kind of a C#-like wrapper around Java. So so you can't do AJAX requests, which is a little odd because you're in JavaScript. And you have to roll your own like state manager. So you've got like Ember data, you know, React uses what, Redux or Flux or one of those, right? It's like a state, like you have these kind of like state managers. Well, you can't do that. So if you want these components in this thing to be connected together, you have to kind of roll your own like event manager thing to manage these global events to them. And anyway, it's a disaster. So that's option one, okay? Option two is you can, which is probably what you use, you can do a traditional HTML page. They call them Visualforce pages. And it is an HTML page when it's all said and done, but you don't control the rendering of that page, right? It's an HTML page on their server that you're just taking some markup and throwing on, but you really have you don't have control over it. And so that's pretty much it. You just get that. It has pretty much all the same cons, not componentized at all. And again, the file has a .page extension instead of .html. So again, your editor has no clue what to do with it. Okay. So these are some of the problems, and you want to do these fancy UIs in this Salesforce. And these UIs are typically for other employees in that company using it, but you can also make these public facing for your customers. And so you want to have a nice UI, and it makes it super hard to do. Okay. So I'm going to just show you some ugly things, okay? This, I haven't done any of the lightning components in Salesforce. We have another team that did it, and I looked at that code and just kind of decided I didn't really want anything to do with it. So this is what a traditional page, a Visualforce page in Salesforce. So you see, in the end, it has, this is what they recommend out of the box, the way to custom do a page. And if you notice, it is, I've got some JavaScript on there, which is all inline. No, I'm not pulling it really from any other files. And I get down, and it's just all these Apex tags and to do things. And this is kind of their built-in approach to doing UIs. And this renders a page that looks like a 90s, like a good web page from the 90s is what it looks like. It's ugly and horrendous. So this is what I was doing for a while. Couldn't use it. Couldn't find a good way to use Ember. So then I figured it out and said, okay, I'll just do the old school Ember way of doing the handlebars templates in JavaScript. So this was the next approach at another page I did. And here, you can see that we're doing the whole handlebars template compiler, right? So I'm doing all my inline stuff. And if you'll notice, so we've got all my markup, all my components up here, and then we get down to all the actual Ember portion of it. And again, you'll notice that this is all on a single page, because the only way to get resources on a page in Salesforce is to either pull them in via like a CDN, or they have an internal storage thing they call a static resource that has to be basically like a zip file that you upload, right? So if I wanted to edit this code in a separate file, I would either have to save it and sync it to a remote CDN to pull it in, or zip it up, sync it to Salesforce so it'll pull from there. But either one, again, is still pretty darn slow, because now I have to wait for these other things to happen, okay? So this was the struggle. And again, if you look, this is rendering as a Visualforce page, which kind of gives me a little bit of like syntax highlighting, but I still don't get any IntelliSense or anything like that. So those are the ugly ways to do it, and it's really slow. And again, remind you that every save could take 30 seconds or a minute to save. Super slow. So that's the built-in way to do it. Okay, so why should we go through the trouble of creating an Ember app that I want in Salesforce instead of just creating like an external normal app? Why not just create an app, host it on a server, and use just make AJAX requests via Salesforce API to communicate with data? That seems like the normal thing, right? Well, so there's some disadvantages of the external apps. Salesforce imposes limits on everything, and one of those is a daily API limit. And I think the limit is 45 million API hits a day. And right now, my company is hovering around the 40 million mark. So 40 million calls into Salesforce in like a rolling 24-hour window. And that's because we've got servers and services and everything in the world is reaching into this thing. And so, because it is our primary kind of data source. So if you start doing external apps, you got to think, every AJAX request is only going to contribute to that. So, times that by several hundred or maybe 1,000 employees, you're just going to be just adding more API hits, right? And we're going to hit this governor limit, right? And once you hit the governor limit, all your AJAX requests just start failing, right? They just return a 500 or I think they use a 400 status code for that. But anyway, so they just start failing, which is bad for business. You don't have access to any of the server-side code that's been written. So a lot of times, a lot of your business logic is obviously sitting in your back-end code, right? If you've got this external app, you don't have access to it. The only way that you can is in Salesforce, you can create a custom REST endpoint, right? So I can actually create an endpoint that exposes some of that logic that I can call just like a normal REST API. The problem, though, is that Salesforce, when you do a custom REST API, they only allow one HTTP verb per resource. So you can't say, I can't say a GET request to /accounts to get a list of accounts, and then say GET /accounts/account ID to get a single account. Because that's two GET requests to the same resource, right? So what would have to happen in that scenario is your /accounts/account ID, a GET request, would just need to return a list with one item in it, which is what we've had to do, right? So super hacky and just not very conventional, right? And so you get one HTTP verb, so one post, one put, one delete, one patch, one get, and that's it. So if you want it to feel native to Salesforce, so here's a disadvantage of an external app too, is your users authenticate into Salesforce, into one system, and then you expect them to use another tool that they then have to authenticate to this tool as well. So you're kind of authenticating into two different apps, which kind of wouldn't be that's not very cool, right? I mean, you're in one UI doing all your daily work, you kind of want to stay there. So you could iframe it in, but you kind of have to run that same problem of you might have to authenticate to this secondary UI inside when you're already authenticated. And it's just kind of this weird thing. And this has been our approach up until recently. And it kind of got it to work a little bit, but pretty hacky. Just not a very good user experience from other employees or so on and so forth. So here's some advantages of having a native app. And when I say native, I just mean if I can render my code on that Visualforce page, right? So if I'm in there and then I'm connected to the system, right? So I can query all the data I want, no API hits, right? So by using their page, when it renders in your browser, they stub out some JavaScript that allows you to make those AJAX requests for free. So I can query and pull and do all this stuff that I want to do without costing any limits, right? So that's most companies won't face this because they're not going to hit the 45 million, but in our case, we're getting close and need to find ways to get that data without costing API hits, right? So that's one advantage of it feeling native in there. Free access to server-side code. Without exposing a REST endpoint, I can execute any code in the system on the server side via JavaScript just by calling it, right? No, I don't have to worry. It's not an AJAX request, and I'll show you this in a little bit. It literally stubs it out on the page for you to just use. So it's super cool that way. I can embed any other UI in there that I want. So Salesforce promotes this kind of like clicks versus code. So they advertise to non-developers. Say, hey, you can build this custom logic just by clicking through this UI and just setting some stuff up. So I could load those on the page. If somebody had created like a guided flow, I can render it right there in the page, right? I can't do that in an external app. So all of those built-in guided flows, I don't have access to. And again, I can just control the user flow. I can redirect them inside the org to different things. I can manipulate other portions of the DOM, so can kind of avoid refreshes. Our iframe is weird because you're in this UI. You have an iframe of an Ember app that they're clicking through, and it's super dynamic, doing all this stuff. When behind the scenes, it's manipulating the data that they're looking above and around this thing, but they have to refresh the page to see it. And Salesforce, everything is a hard page refresh. There's no refreshing just sections. It's a full page load every UI, right? So it's super slow, and the more that people refresh, it just bogs the system down, right? So anyway, probably enough negativity about it, okay? So basically, what you're saying is that I want to use Ember CLI in my favorite editor code, and my app can't be native to Salesforce because I can't have the best of both worlds, right? Demo time. So what this demo is today is I wrote a Node.js command line tool that allows you to run an Ember app locally, but have it serve up inside Salesforce natively, so that you're bypassing all of that server sync and all of that stuff. And so I might have to turn this real fast so I can see you guys. Okay. So I've got in my projects my Visualforce pages, right? And so we'll kind of look at these. So just to prove that this demo is real, give me a name of an app.
A name of an app?
Sure. Or you're creating it's an Ember app.
Oh.
But a picture of it just being a UI in this Salesforce.
Okay, Groovy.
Groovy. Okay. Ember new Groovy. Right? Oh, spelled it wrong. Okay, Groovy's not up in that list, right? So let's get that started. This UI is going to be... Am I the only Windows user in here? This tool right here, Commander, it's a console emulator. It's great. Okay. Okay. Okay, I want you to witness that there is no command on my computer called SVF. Right? Not recognized. So let's do an npm install. Simple VF CLI is what I called it. And that's a global module. I was going to start these before the demo so that we didn't have to wait. And I totally spaced it out. So what we'll do is we'll install a fresh app. And we'll install this command line tool. So again, SVF is a tool that I wrote, and so it's a command line tool, and the point of it is that it connects to Salesforce, and it's gonna take your app that you're running locally, and it's gonna proxy it. Has anybody used ngrok or local tunnel? I think it's called. Anyway, there's a few that basically just pokes a hole and exposes a local port that you're running out to the outside world, right? So what it's going to do is it establishes an ngrok tunnel that tunnels out your local host 4200 out into the wild, and so our page is going to look at that, and so in a roundabout way, it's pulling that resource right off your box. So that's how we're going to do it. If you guys ever do use this thing, right here I asked to collect some anonymous usage, so do some rollbar error reporting for things, and maybe some additional analytics in the future. So please select yes. I promise I won't steal any info or anything. Okay, so now we're going to have an SVF command on our system. And if you're familiar with Node, or if you're not familiar with Node, then basically when you install a global module, if you create a command line tool, it basically, when I type SVF, it's just executing a JavaScript file, but it's in your path. So they kind of do some setup where you can tell it, hey, I want this JavaScript file to respond to this command. So type SVF and it gives a command, okay? Okay, so our app is running right here. So let's just make sure that we get our little Tomster here. 4200. Groovy. And if someone could tell me how to clear the icon, the favicon cache in Chrome, because every time I pull it up, it does an Angular sign, and I can't get rid of that sucker. So if you know how to do that, let me know. Okay. Okay, so our Ember app is running. Okay, it's good. We're running a local host. We're not inside our Salesforce org yet, so we got to fix that. So this tool I wrote, and I'll try to keep this brief, but we've got a couple commands: auth, new, serve, deploy, and list. Okay. So if we do a list, LS for short, we can kind of see if we have any, if we're connected to any Salesforce orgs yet, which we're not. Okay. So let's do that now. So we're going to say we're going to auth to an org. Okay, give me an alias. Well, this one is actually my personal org. So I could do a work one, but so it's personal. So type of org. Well, this one is actually a production box. Make sure I spelled that correctly. That looks pretty good. Security token is here. Okay, so we authenticated to a Salesforce org. Okay, and so next thing we need to do is new. We're creating a new Visualforce page that's going to host this Ember app in Salesforce, right? So so here we go. We're going to say SVF new. We need a new page. Okay, so again, our app's running locally. We need it on there. So okay, so let me scroll this up so you can see. So okay, well, which org? It's personal org. Build system. The idea is this is going to support several build systems, perhaps, but obviously giving Ember's CLI some love. So that's the only one right now. So then each build system is a separate plugin. All right, so you can create a plugin for any build system you want, as long as it inherits. There's an interface that it has to use, and as long as those methods are there, then in theory it'll work. So it's actually behind the scenes right now downloading this other node module to install the Ember CLI plugin. The screen recorder is sucking the life out of this computer, so bear with me here. And this approach, and the reason I was excited about this is right now I'm talking about Salesforce, but this in theory could be applied to any kind of like cloud platform that you don't necessarily have control. So if when we deploy this app later to Salesforce, it's not using the HTML page that was created by Ember CLI. It's using the HTML page in Salesforce, right? So that's where I'm talking about, like, I don't get to control that, right? Okay, so let's go back, and it says, and try to put a nice little URL. So it's in your config environment folder, right? In your file. So config environment, and what it wants is this to be hash. Okay, hash. Okay, that's the change we need to make. So let's boot this thing back up. Okay. And here, it should have detected that we made the change. Okay, so now, hello.
Hi.
So now, it's asking for the name, what we should name the Visualforce page. And it chose Groovy, not because that's the name of the folder we're in, because that is the name of your app in the package.json file. Right, so we did Ember new Groovy. Regardless of what folder we're in, your package JSON says that your app is named Groovy, so it asks us that there. So we'll stick with that. We'll say Groovy. So right now it's creating a new Visualforce page in Salesforce. Okay. So let's get this up over here. And so let's log into Salesforce. And they have a problem with their login. It's the way that they do cookies. But I'm going to enter this password correct right now, and it's going to tell me that it's not correct, which is really weird.
Using Okta to log in.
Yep.
It's been really weird. This happened like a month ago. We could only log in using Okta at this point.
Yep. So I have to put my password in twice every time, and it's kind of pissing me off. So your Salesforce doesn't look like this. This is the Lightning. It's all kind of.
That's pretty.
Yeah, it's much prettier, right?
Oh my God, that's great.
Yeah, not like the other one. Okay, so if we go to this ID of this page that it created, okay, and I'll see if I can bump this up here too. Okay, so now we created the page, okay, which is all good and well. And if we go to preview this page, nothing on it because our app is running locally. We've created the page, but if you look right now, it needs to pull our assets, our vendor, the vendor files, and your app files for all your resources, right? And so, but we haven't deployed those to Salesforce, and we haven't started our ngrok tunnel yet. So right now, the app's doing nothing. Okay. So now, our Ember app is running. That's good. So now we're going to run the SVF serve command. Okay, or you could say they all have an alias for short. Okay, so we run this, ask what org we're doing, personal. There's our page, which is there's our output directory for our page. So let's start this up. Hopefully this doesn't take too long since this is kind of being slow. Starting the ngrok tunnel takes a little while. Is this confused the crap out of anybody yet? Is everyone tracking? Because if you got a question or whatever, feel free. So this is so it served up this ngrok tunnel, and this URL right here you don't need to know about. But right now, hitting that URL, let me scroll this up so you can see. Hitting that URL is the same thing as hitting localhost 4200. It's the exact same thing, right? And even if you're running something on your box, like you're running a fiddler or some kind of like a sniffer or something, you'll see the request come in to pull the resource off your box, right? Okay, so now let's go back to our page where we were previewing Groovy. So now let's do a refresh here. And there we go. There's our Ember app. And the Tomster's missing because the way that the Ember welcome page, it's actually looking for it right at the domain level. So it's looking for force.com/the Tomster picture. And so they're not really, I'm not sure what they're doing there, but so it doesn't show up, but I don't have to worry about that. So now, so here we are, we're running locally, and we're like, okay, well, yeah, but it is actually pulling that off our machine here. So let's go over to our, we want our app, let's go to our application template. Okay, let's get rid of this welcome page thing, and we can just say like Ember ATX, sweet. Okay, so we'll save this, come back here. Live reload doesn't work because ngrok doesn't support like sockets, right? So unfortunately that doesn't work. You got to manually refresh. But here we are, refresh. So we're at a different domain running an app off my machine. And so now that this is being rendered under the Salesforce domain, I can start accessing Salesforce code while running Ember CLI locally on my machine, which is totally awesome. Okay, so here we are. Yep, that Groovy changed localhost. So let's see if let's go in here. So that's all good and well, but we haven't actually done anything yet that would be outside of just like an external app, right? I mean, it's like we could have got this far much quicker doing an external app. So, so let's kind of see where our advantage comes in here. Okay, so let's do. We need to be able to invoke that some of that Salesforce code. So let's create a service, and we'll call this thing remote objects. Okay, that's what Salesforce calls them, right? So let's create a remote objects service that we'll use to kind of put all of our kind of custom AJAX calls in there. And let's give this thing a route. We'll just give it a base index route, okay? And meanwhile, the point of this too is this thing right here can just sit off to the side all day long. You never even have to worry about it. You can just develop, start and stop your app all that you want. This thing just sits there and watches port 4200 all day long, whether something's served up there or not. So that's the idea behind that. You just kind of set it aside and you don't really have to think about it. Okay? Okay, so now this right here, if we go back to the Salesforce page, where's my mouse? Okay, so this right here is some special little markup by Salesforce, and they call it remote objects. So now there's an account table, and if I want data from there, again, this is where it normally costs me the API hit, but if I can access it via this remote objects, and when this page renders, it basically just turns this into a bunch of JavaScript, right? So if I want access to that, I kind of got to have it in here, and that obviously can't get that, you know, elsewhere. So, so let's save that on there. Okay, so then let's go into our. So we created that service, right? So let's put this in here. So this S-object model doesn't exist in this context, and it possibly, I think you might have to, you normally might have to mess with your ESLint config so that it's not like, hey, where did this like random variable come from? But because that's on the page when this app renders in Salesforce, it's totally valid and it's there, right? So, so there's our service that calls that thing. Let's dump this portion in our route, our index route. Okay, so our remote object service, and we want to run the query, and we want to query that account. Okay, and then we just need a little for loop here in our templates index page. Okay, so we should have our model, should be accounts, and so if we look at there, we're saying that we want to get, we're going to query accounts, we're kind of assuming that we want all of them, so it should return a map of those records. Okay, so now when we go here, so there you go. So there's all the accounts. That just made an AJAX request into Salesforce. Didn't cost me a dime to do it. No API hits. No limits at all. And now I can actively develop. And the second that I save, I can refresh this page, and I kind of have full access to the system. So imagine this page being a really advanced Ember app. It would be in Salesforce. It'd be completely native. And yeah, you could have it do whatever you want. So there you have it. Ember app, Ember CLI, all the tools that you normally use, and you're developing on a different domain in real time. All right.